Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Um, for this one, you sent in some sources about quitting smoking,
Okay.
and one of them is actually in English as a second language lesson.
Oh, wow.
So I have to admit, when I first saw that, I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But the more I thought about it, the more it kind of made sense.
Okay.
Because quitting smoking really is like its own world, right?
It really is. You have your own language, you have your own challenges.
Yeah,
It's
that whole thing.
it's a whole culture.
Yeah, and this English lesson is actually a really clever way to get into all that.
Well, it uses a skit about a couple arguing over quitting,
Right.
which I think is a pretty clever approach because, conflict and humor, those are things that tend to stick in our minds,
Absolutely.
and it makes language more memorable.
Yeah, it's like we're kind of eavesdropping on this argument and learning some vocabulary at the same time. And there are all these phrases that jumped out at me, like they use ashtray not just for the object, but also to describe like a really strong, unpleasant smell.
It is fascinating how language evolves over time. Ashtray goes from a simple noun to this term that's very loaded.
Yeah.
It's almost like shorthand for all those negative associations that people have with smoking.
It's so vivid.
Yeah.
And they also talk about the difference between cutting down and quitting.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think is the difference there, like behaviorally?
Well, cut down kind of acknowledges that quitting completely can be so difficult for some people. It
Sure.
can be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So cutting down or reducing gradually can be a more achievable first step for some.
Yeah.
It's kind of like harm reduction,
Yeah.
meeting people where they are in their journey.
Yeah, dipping your toes in the water before you like jump in.
Exactly.
Speaking of jumping in, there's that phrase, going cold turkey.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always wondered where that comes from.
It's funny. The origin is actually thought to come from the appearance of someone who's abruptly stopped an addiction.
Okay.
So, like, their skin might get pale and clammy, covered in goosebumps,
Oh, wow.
kind of like a plucked cold turkey.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's hilariously specific.
It is.
But I guess it does capture that, like,
It does.
that sudden jarring feeling.
Yeah.
So if going cold turkey is so tough,
hmm
how much does willpower actually play into quitting successfully?
I mean, willpower is definitely crucial,
Yeah.
but it's definitely more nuanced than just, being strong or having a strong will.
Right.
It's really our ability to resist impulses and stay focused on those long-term goals,
Right.
even when we're faced with immediate temptation.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Willpower can actually be depleted, like a muscle getting tired.
Interesting.
So if you're constantly exerting willpower in other areas of your life,
Okay.
it can be harder to resist those smoking urges.
There's a finite resource.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The lesson also describes this intense physical urge to smoke.
Yeah.
Like it's a craving for food almost.
Right.
What's happening in the brain when that happens?
So that urge is rooted in neurochemistry.
Okay.
When you smoke, nicotine triggers the release of dopamine in the brain,
Yeah.
which is a neurotransmitter that makes us feel good.
Okay.
And it reinforces that behavior, which in this case is smoking.
Right.
But over time, the brain gets accustomed to this dopamine rush.
Okay.
And when nicotine levels drop, it craves more.
Yeah.
And that leads to that really intense urge you're talking about.
It's like a cycle.
It is a powerful cycle to break.
Yeah, so it's not just about being weak-willed. It's like an actual physical thing.
It is.
This is a really good English lesson.
It is.
But it's not just about the language of quitting. It also brings up some of those real-world changes.
Right.
Like there's that line about laws are cracking down,
Yeah.
making it harder to smoke in public places.
Yeah, cracking down, I think, signals a really deliberate and forceful attempt to restrict a behavior.
And we've seen such a shift in public health policy in the last, 50 years or so,
Right.
moving away from simply educating people about the risks of smoking
Yeah.
to actively discouraging it through legislation.
And those smoking bans in public places, that's like a perfect example.
It is.
And then it also talks about how cigarettes are getting more and more expensive.
Oh, yeah.
So is that another strategy to
Yeah.
try to get people to quit?
Absolutely.
Like hit them in the wallet.
Exactly. Higher prices, often through what we call sin taxes,
right.
are meant to deter consumption,
Okay.
especially among younger people and people with lower incomes.
Mm.
It's kind of using economics to nudge people toward those healthier choices.
Okay.
And there's evidence to suggest that it actually works.
So it makes you wonder then, are those graphic warnings on cigarette packs even necessary?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Because research shows that those warnings may not be as effective as intended.
Really?
There's some evidence that they may actually backfire.
Especially among certain groups.
I'm surprised. I mean, those are pretty jarring images.
They are.
So, like, why wouldn't they work?
Well, there are a few reasons.
Mm.
First, habituation.
Okay.
Smokers see these warnings all the time, so they become desensitized to them.
Right. They just tune them out.
Exactly. The shock value wears off.
Like a commercial you've seen 1,000 times.
Right.
Just don't even see it anymore.
Exactly. And then there's also this concept called cognitive dissonance,
Oh, okay.
which is that mental discomfort we feel
Right.
when our actions contradict our beliefs.
Right.
So smokers know that smoking is harmful, but they continue to smoke.
Of course.
So to kind of reduce that discomfort,
Yeah.
they might downplay the risks or rationalize their behavior.
Right. So those warnings might actually reinforce that.
Exactly. Like, oh, those warnings, they're exaggerated or it won't happen to me.
Right. Right.
And then
Like a defense mechanism.
it is.
Yeah.
And then you have this potential for a forbidden fruit effect.
Oh, interesting.
Especially with young people.
Yeah.
The warnings might actually make smoking seem more rebellious or cool.
Oh, like it's the thing you're not supposed to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if it's framed as something that, adults are trying to control.
So it's not just about the image. It's how it's framed and
Yes.
who you're trying to reach.
Exactly. You've hit on a very crucial point.
Yeah.
Any message, even one with good intentions,
Yeah.
needs to resonate with the audience to be effective.
For sure.
If it doesn't connect with their values and motivations,
Right.
it's likely to fall flat.
Totally. Which brings us to another interesting point that the lesson brings up the social smoker,
Oh, yeah.
that person who only smokes in social situations.
Right.
Is that a real distinction?
That's a tricky one.
Or is it just like a way to rationalize?
Yeah.
Because the lesson doesn't really get into that.
Right. It doesn't. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about how our brains don't really distinguish between, a cigarette you smoke when you're out with friends versus one that you have, by yourself at home.
Right.
That addictive property is still there no matter what.
So even if you think you're in control because you only do it socially,
Right.
your brain might be telling a different story.
Yeah.
It's kind of unsettling.
It is. And it speaks to a broader point about how we often frame these conversations
Okay.
about health behaviors.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on these extremes, right?
Like all or nothing.
Yes. Complete abstinence or full-blown addiction.
Right.
But human behavior is much more complex than that.
Sure.
It exists on a spectrum.
So instead of just saying like, don't smoke, it's bad for you.
Right.
Maybe we need a more nuanced approach.
Exactly. Meeting people where they are on that spectrum,
Yeah.
recognizing their individual circumstances and motivations, that's really key.
So it's almost like this English lesson, right?
Yeah.
By teaching the language of quitting.
Right.
It's equipping people to talk about their struggles,
Exactly.
to ask for help, to navigate all those tricky social situations.
It is. It's empowering, isn't it?
It is.
Language gives us those tools
Yeah.
to understand and address our own behaviors.
This is making me think about something else the lesson mentioned,
Okay.
about how laws are cracking down on smoking.
Yeah.
It feels like as a society, we've moved beyond just personal responsibility.
It's true.
Like this is a public health issue now.
You're absolutely right. And I think that shift really started
Okay.
when we became aware of the dangers of secondhand smoke in the latter part of the 20th century.
Okay.
That's what really reframed smoking
Yeah.
from a private choice to a public health concern.
So it's like we all decided we need to protect ourselves,
Exact.
even if individual smokers aren't on board yet.
Yes. It does raise an interesting question, though.
What's that?
Where do we draw the line
Okay.
between individual freedom
Yeah.
and the well-being of the community?
That is a good question.
It's a tension that comes up in
Yeah.
so many public health debates.
Like
Vaccinations,
Yeah.
mask mandates.
all that stuff.
It's a tough one.
It is. And it makes you think about how effective different approaches actually are.
Right.
Like all these crackdowns,
Yeah.
bans on smoking in public places.
Right.
Do they actually work?
Well, luckily, we have research to look at.
Okay.
And studies have shown consistently
Yeah.
that smoke-free policies do lead to reductions in smoking rates,
That's a good.
especially among young people.
Okay.
They also reduce exposure to secondhand smoke,
Of course.
which has immediate health benefits
Sure.
for everyone.
So it's not just symbolic.
It's not.
It actually makes a difference.
They do. And they also contribute to changing those social norms
Okay.
around smoking.
Interesting.
So when smoking is less visible and less socially acceptable,
Yeah.
it becomes less appealing,
Right.
especially for those who might be considering starting.
So like a ripple effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
these policy changes can create broader shifts in those behaviors and attitudes. It's all connected.
It is. It reminds us that those individual choices are always being influenced
Right?
by that social context, by those
Yeah.
messages and norms.
Which brings us back to the social smoker.
Right.
Is that just a social construct?
It's hard to say.
Or is it something more?
Right.
Could it be like a stepping stone
Yeah.
to quitting completely?
Yeah.
Or I guess in the other direction to heavier smoking?
Well, the term itself, I think, can be misleading
Okay.
because it implies a level of control that may not actually exist.
Right, because as we said before, nicotine is addictive no matter how often
It is.
you're doing it.
And that just one cigarette mentality can be really slippery.
Yeah, especially in social situations
Yeah.
where you might feel pressure to conform or where smoking is just part of the ritual.
Think about it.
Yeah,
In the past, smoking was everywhere.
everywhere.
It was on TV, in movies,
Mm-hmm.
even in doctors' offices.
Wow.
Those social cues to smoke were everywhere.
Yeah.
But as those cues have diminished,
Through those public health campaigns and those policy changes,
right.
we've seen smoking rates go down.
So we've kind of reprogrammed our social scripts,
We have to some extent.
at least a little bit.
Yeah.
But even with all those changes,
Yeah.
the question remains,
What is it?
what really motivates someone to quit for good?
Right.
Is it willpower,
Yeah.
social pressure,
Huh.
fear?
Fear of the health consequences.
Yeah. Or is it something else entirely?
It's a really complex mix of factors.
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone.
Okay.
But I think one thing that seems to be really crucial is that sense of personal agency.
Okay.
A belief that you actually have the power to change.
Like it's not just someone telling you to do something.
Exactly.
It's like you deciding you want to do it.
It's intrinsic motivation.
Yeah. And I think that also means addressing like the reasons why someone's smoking in the first place.
Yes, absolutely.
So is it to deal with stress?
Yeah.
Is it because all their friends do it?
Right.
Is it just a habit at this point?
All of those things.
Yeah. And once you figure that out,
Right.
you can start to find healthier alternatives.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're not just giving up cigarettes.
Yeah.
You're replacing that behavior
Right.
with something else that meets that same need.
It makes me think about something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
If those graphic warnings aren't that effective,
Yeah.
what would be a better way
Right.
to get people to quit?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
I think public health experts are constantly looking for those most effective strategies, and there's no magic bullet.
Of course.
But there are some approaches that seem to be pretty promising.
Like what?
Well-personalized feedback and counseling, for example.
Okay, so less about those general warnings.
Right.
More about like tailored support.
Exactly. Imagine if instead of just seeing those scary images,
Yeah.
smokers got information about their own risk factors
Okay.
and the potential benefits of quitting for them.
So it's more personal.
It is. Or what if they had access to a counselor? Uh-huh.
Who could help them come up with a plan
Okay.
that addressed their specific needs and challenges.
So meeting people where they are.
Exactly.
I like that. What about using technology?
Oh, yeah.
There's so many apps now
Tons of apps.
to help people quit.
And some of them are really sophisticated.
Oh, wow.
They can track your cravings,
Okay.
provide coping strategies in real time,
Yeah.
even use gamification techniques.
Gamification.
Yes.
To make quitting more fun.
To make it more engaging and rewarding.
You get like points for not smoking.
It might sound a little silly.
Yeah.
But our brains love novelty and they love challenges.
It is true.
And turning it into a game can actually make it feel less daunting.
Okay, so it's like tricking your brain into doing the right thing.
In a way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's research suggesting that these apps
Yeah.
can be even more effective than things like nicotine replacement therapy.
Wow. So maybe the future of quitting smoking isn't about scaring people.
Right.
It's more about giving them the tools they need. It's about moving from fear to hope,
I love that.
from punishment to possibility.
Quitting is hard,
It is. There's no doubt about it.
but it's possible.
It is absolutely achievable with the right support and the right strategies.
I think that's a great place to wrap up
It is.
this deep dive.
I agree.
We learned that quitting smoking isn't just about putting out a cigarette.
It's so much more than that.
It's about understanding addiction.
The power of our social circles.
Yeah, the influence of the people around us.
Absolutely.
Even the way we use language.
Language is powerful.
So before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
We talked about a lot of different ways
We did.
to encourage people to quit.
From policies to apps.
Yeah. If you were in charge of a public health campaign,
Okay.
what would you focus on? What message would you want to send?
A good question.
And how would you make sure that the right people hear it?
That's a good challenge.
It is
Yeah.
something to think about.
I'm curious to hear what people come up with.
Me too.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep on diving deep, and thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.